Della Foster's heel snapped clean off as the glossy double doors of the Grand Lexington Hotel swung shut behind her. And with it, the last of her luck vanished. She staggered forward, blinking at the empty valet lane. "No, no, no," she muttered, gripping the handle of her tote bag while the other hand clutched a half-crushed paper cup of hotel coffee. "Please tell me he didn't just..." A sleek black town car turned the corner and drove away, her ride disappearing into Manhattan traffic. "Are you kidding me?" she shouted after it, waving her arms like she could flag it back with sheer desperation, but it was gone, just like that. Her cousin had left without her. She looked down at her broken heel, then up at the gray clouds rolling in. Of course it was going to rain. "Rough morning," a deep voice said behind her. Della turned, startled. A man in a navy suit leaned casually against a silver Aston Martin parked in the private lane beside the hotel. He had his sleeves rolled up, an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. His tie was loosened like he didn't care about rules, and his hair was just messy enough to look good on purpose. His eyes were sharp. Green, curious, she straightened, suddenly aware of her coffee-stained blouse and thrifted pencil skirt. "You could say that, miss your ride," she raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, you saw the whole thing and figured I'm one more broken shoe away from a meltdown." He smiled, easy, amused, like he did it often. "I was going to offer you a ride, actually." Della blinked. "Excuse me, I'm headed downtown. Looks like you are too." He gestured to the cab line, which was now backed up with hotel guests and honking taxis. "Or you can wait here and get yelled at by 5 different drivers." She narrowed her eyes. "Do you always offer rides to stranded women outside of luxury hotels?" "Only the ones who look like they're about to cry but are too proud to admit it." Her lips parted, offended and maybe a little impressed. "I'm not crying, I know," he said. "That's why I like you already." She stared at him. "I don't even know your name." He opened the passenger door of the Aston like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Ian Ellwood." She hesitated. "Della. Nice to meet you, Della." "You have about 5 seconds before it starts pouring." As if on cue, a fat raindrop splashed on the concrete between them. Della groaned. "Fine, but if you're a psycho, I swear I'll jump out at the next red light." Ian laughed as she climbed in. "Fair enough." Inside, the car smelled like leather and something expensive she couldn't place. The seats wrapped around her like she just sat down in a cloud. The city buzzed past as he pulled into traffic with a smoothness that made her stomach flip. "So," he said, glancing sideways, "what were you doing at the Grand Lexington?" "Job interview," she said, trying to smooth her skirt. "Temp agency sent me. Assistant to the assistant of someone who probably doesn't remember my name." "I doubt that." She gave him a look. "Why? You're not the kind of person people forget." Her cheeks warmed, but she looked away. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're stubborn, and you didn't want to accept help, but you did anyway. That tells me a lot." Della crossed her arms. "What about you?" "You hang out at hotels waiting for women in distress," he grinned. "Nope, I was there for a meeting, but I saw you on the steps and something told me not to get in the car until I spoke to you." She glanced at him. "That sounds like a line. Maybe it is." "But I meant it." They stopped at a light. Della stared out at the buildings, trying to ignore how good he smelled or how intense his gaze felt. "So what do you do, Ian Ellwood?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. "I run a company," he said simply. "Investments, real estate." "A few other things." "Must be nice," she muttered. He glanced at her. "What?" She looked at him. "To have your life together, to not be one missed ride away from losing a job you don't even have yet." His voice softened. "Everyone's missed a ride at least once." "You just happened to miss yours at the right time," Della snorted. "Right, because getting in a stranger's car on a rainy Tuesday morning is exactly how my grandma imagined I'd start my career." Ian smiled again. "Well, I'm glad you did." They pulled up to her building, and Della reached for the door handle quickly, needing to escape the warmth of that car before it melted her completely. "Thanks for the ride," she said. "Wait," Ian said. "Can I see you again?" She blinked. "What? Dinner, drinks?" "Something that doesn't involve broken heels or spilled coffee." Della hesitated. "Why?" "Because I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't spoken to you on those steps," he said. "And I don't want to find out." Her heart did something strange, then like it skipped a beat and then tripped over itself trying to restart. She bit her lip. "I don't usually do this." "I don't either," he said, eyes never leaving hers. She paused, then gave a small nod. "Okay." Dinner, Ian's smile stretched wider. "Tomorrow night I'll pick you up." He handed her a card. It was thick, matte black, and had nothing but his name and a number engraved in silver. Della climbed out, still a little dazed, and watched his card disappear into the mist. She glanced down at the card, Ian Ellwood. She had no idea who he really was, but something told her she was about to find out. Della stood in front of her closet, towel wrapped around her damp hair, staring blankly at the limited selection of clothes she owned that didn't look like they belonged in a job interview or a clearance bin. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand again, second call from her cousin in under 10 minutes, but she ignored it. Right now, she wasn't in the mood to explain why she'd agreed to dinner with a man she'd only just met. A man who drove a car that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. She pulled out a deep plum dress she'd worn once to a holiday party and held it up. It wasn't trendy or designer, but it fit in all the right places and, more importantly, didn't have any visible holes. She tossed it on the bed and went to dry her hair, trying not to think about how ridiculous this all seemed. At exactly 7, a knock sounded on her door. Her breath caught. Not a text, not a call, an actual knock. She opened the door to find Ian standing there in a charcoal coat, hands in his pockets, gaze sweeping over her with quiet appreciation. "You look incredible," he said, voice lower than she remembered. Della tried not to squirm. "You're not so bad yourself." He offered his arm without a word, and she took it, locking the door behind her. Outside, a sleek black SUV waited by the curb, engine humming softly. "That's not the same car from yesterday," she said as he opened the passenger side. "No," Ian replied, helping her in. "I figured we'd need something more comfortable tonight." The driver pulled away, merging into traffic as if the whole night had already been mapped out. Della glanced around the interior. There were chilled water bottles in the console, a soft jazz station playing low, and a faint scent of cedar and something herbal in the air. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see," he said, watching her instead of the road. The SUV pulled up outside a building with tall glass windows and heavy uplighting that made the exterior glow like a sculpture. A doorman opened her door before she could even reach for the handle. Della stepped out, heels clicking on the marble walkway. "This place looks like the kind of restaurant where they serve food with tweezers." "It's actually a private club," Ian said, guiding her inside. "They owe me a favor." The interior was all velvet booths and candlelight, the kind of place where conversations happened in murmurs and wine was poured from bottles without labels. A hostess greeted Ian by name and led them to a secluded table near a wall of flickering sconces. Della sat, trying not to gape at the opulence. "So, this is casual for you," Ian shrugged out of his coat. "Sometimes I forget how unusual it is." She narrowed her eyes. "You mean being treated like you own the whole block?" His expression shifted. "I don't usually bring people here." "But I wanted to tonight." A waiter arrived without a menu and asked if they'd like the chef's selection. Ian nodded, and after a brief glance at her, so did Della. Once they were alone again, she leaned forward. "All right, I'll bite. What exactly do you do?" Ian studied her for a moment. "My family built a holding company. I expanded it: tech, property, logistics. We buy broken things and rebuild them." "And you're the one doing all the rebuilding." "I'm the one who decides what's worth saving." Della tilted her head. "So you're the executioner, more like the surgeon," he said. "I cut to fix, not destroy." She looked at him for a long beat. "That's a lot of responsibility." "It is." The waiter returned with 2 artful starters, something involving scallops and citrus foam. Della picked up her fork slowly. "Ian," she said after a moment, "why me?" His brow lifted. "Why not you? I mean it. You could be with anyone in this room, models, heiresses, people who know what all these forks are for." He leaned back, gaze never wavering. "Because you didn't care who I was. Most people do." "I didn't know who you were," she corrected. "Exactly." There was a pause between them, the kind that felt like it belonged in a quieter space, but neither of them broke it. Della set her fork down. This feels like a dream I'm going to wake up from. One of those weird ones where everything's too perfect, so you know it can't be real. I don't do perfect, Ian said, but I do real. And this is real, she asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. It could be. She folded her hands in her lap. What happens when the dream ends? Then we decide if it was worth chasing in the first place. The rest of dinner unfolded like a slow burn, each course more delicate than the last, paired with wines she couldn't pronounce and flavors she'd never tasted before. But the real richness came from the way Ian listened. Not just nodded or waited for his turn to speak, but truly listened. He asked about her painting, something she'd barely mentioned, and remembered the name of the community center where she taught weekend classes. He didn't flinch when she talked about her student loans, or the way she sometimes borrowed Wi-Fi from the bakery across the street. By the time dessert arrived, a molten chocolate cake with edible gold leaf, Della felt like her world had shifted. Not exploded, not combusted. Just quietly tilted, like someone had handed her a new set of coordinates. Outside, the SUV waited again, and Ian walked her to her building in silence until they reached her steps. She turned to face him. "Thank you for all of it." "I should be thanking you," he said. "For what? For not being who I expected," she laughed softly. "What did you expect?" He stepped closer. "Someone who'd be impressed by the car, the club, the money." "And I'm not. You're impossible to impress," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I just need more than surface," she whispered. "Then let me show you more," he said, voice low. She didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him, brief but certain. When she pulled back, Ian looked stunned, and maybe a little undone. "Good night, Ian," she said, unlocking her door. He didn't move as she stepped inside, just stood there watching her. And for the first time in a long while, Della didn't feel like she was chasing something. She felt like it was chasing her. Della stood frozen on the sidewalk long after the door closed behind her, her back to the world, heart pounding like it had just run a marathon uphill. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood of her apartment door, trying to will her pulse to slow, but it didn't. She had kissed him. Ian Ellwood, and it hadn't felt impulsive, it had felt inevitable. The next morning, her alarm blared before sunrise. Thursdays meant teaching 2 back-to-back beginner painting classes at the community center on East 92nd. It paid almost nothing, but she needed it, and besides, it kept her rooted. Her world had been spinning a little too fast lately. She arrived early, letting herself in with the jangling key the janitor had reluctantly given her last year. Inside, the paint-splattered tables and mismatched stools were exactly as she'd left them. She took a deep breath of turpentine and dried acrylic, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. But then her phone buzzed. She didn't check it. Not yet. By the time the first class began, her thoughts were still circling like birds over a cliff. Ian's voice, his eyes, the way he'd looked at her when she challenged him. She was distracted enough to mistake ultramarine for cobalt during the color mixing demo, and one of her students, a silver-haired woman named Margie, called her on it. "You all right, honey?" Margie asked, lifting a brow. "You're stirring that paint like it owes you money." Della blinked. "I'm fine. Just didn't sleep much." "Ah," Margie said knowingly. "One of those nights." Della smiled at her but didn't reply. By late afternoon, she was walking down the block with a coffee in hand when a tall figure stepped out from the alley beside the center. "Ian," he straightened and looked sheepish, which was startling on a man who usually moved like he owned the pavement. "Didn't want to interrupt your class. I waited. You waited outside for 3 hours. I didn't realize it would take that long." She stared at him. "You could have called. I wanted to see where you go when I'm not around." She raised an eyebrow. "And loitering in an alley felt like the best way to do that." "I'm not great at asking for permission," Ian admitted, stepping closer. She took a sip of her coffee, watching him over the rim. "So what did you learn?" He glanced at the building behind her. "That you're one of the most patient people I've ever seen, and that you don't treat your students like charity cases. You treat them like artists." Della's jaw tightened. "They are artists, I know," Ian said. "I saw the way you looked at their work, like it mattered." She exhaled slowly, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said that to her before, certainly not someone like him. "Come with me," he said suddenly, her eyes narrowed. Where? I want to show you something. I can't just disappear in the middle of the day. Yes, you can, just for a little while, she hesitated, but something in his tone made her say, okay. They walked to the corner where a town car idled, engine humming. He opened the door without a word and she climbed in. This time, the drive was shorter. They pulled up to a steel and glass building nestled between two warehouses in the meatpacking district. Ian led her inside without explaining, flashing a pass at the security guard who nodded silently. When the private elevator doors closed, Della looked up at him. What is this? You'll see. They stepped out into a wide, open loft with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Hudson, but it wasn't the view that caught her breath, it was the space itself. Easels lined one wall, half-finished canvases stood in rows, and natural light poured in from skylights above. The scent of oil paint and wood shavings lingered in the air. This is a working studio, she said, stepping forward slowly. It was, Ian said. Belonged to an artist I used to know. He passed away a few years ago. I bought the space so no one could gut it and turn it into a rooftop bar. Della turned to him, stunned. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to use it, she froze. What? It's yours. For as long as you want it. Ian, I can't. You can, he said, voice firm. You have talent and heart, and you spend your days teaching others when you should be creating your own work too. She shook her head. This is too much. No, Della. What's too much is watching someone like you shrink herself to fit into a world that doesn't deserve her. This, he gestured around, is just space. You're the one who'll make it valuable. Her throat closed up. I can't take this from you. You're not taking anything, I'm giving it. No strings. She stared at him, heart thudding. Why? She whispered. Ian stepped toward her, eyes intense. Because I haven't stopped thinking about you since the moment I saw you on those hotel steps. And I don't want to be the guy who just watches you from the outside. Della sank onto a nearby stool, the weight of everything crashing down at once. You don't even know what you're signing up for. Then tell me. I don't come with polish, she said. I come with student loans and cheap wine and a family that doesn't get it. He knelt in front of her, resting his hands on her knees. I don't want polish, I want real, messy, complicated. You, she swallowed hard, eyes searching his. And if I say yes, then we build something. Together. The silence that followed felt like a held breath between two cliffs, and then she reached up, fingertips brushing his jaw. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, he said, but I'm not walking away. She kissed him again, this time slower, deeper, no hesitation. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. I don't know how to do this with someone like you, she said. I'm not asking you to, he replied. I'm asking you to do it with me. And for the first time in a long time, Della didn't feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She felt like she was finally standing on something solid. Ian's hand closed gently around Della's as she stood in the center of the studio, her gaze sweeping the room slowly, like she was still trying to convince herself it was real. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows and landed on the easels and brushes, dust motes dancing like they had a life of their own. You didn't just give me a space to paint, she said quietly. You gave me a reason to believe I could actually do this. He didn't let go of her hand. You never needed me for that, Della. Her fingers tightened around his. Maybe not, but I think I needed someone to see it. 2 weeks passed in a blur. Della spent every spare moment at the studio, sometimes losing track of time until well past midnight. The first canvas she started was a self-portrait abstract, layered, messy, but it was hers. Ian visited often, never interrupting, just watching her work with a reverence in his eyes that made her chest ache, but the world didn't stop for a love story. One Thursday afternoon, as Della was packing up after class, a man in a tailored gray suit stepped into the community center and asked for her by name. His tone was clipped, his smile practiced. I represent the Lexington Foundation, he said. We fund several of the programs here. Including yours, she blinked. All right. He handed her a folder. We're sponsoring a new exhibition, a feature on emerging artists from underfunded programs. We'd like you to submit. Della opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside was a formal invitation, complete with venue details, a submission deadline, and the foundation's embossed seal. This is, She trailed off. A chance, the man said. One we don't offer lightly. She looked up. Why me? He gave the same tight smile. Someone very high up recommended you. Before she could ask who, he nodded politely and turned on his heel, leaving her alone with the invitation. That night, she found Ian on the rooftop of his apartment building, leaning against the railing with a drink in hand. The city stretched behind him like a lit canvas. You recommended me, she said, holding up the folder. He didn't deny it. You deserved the opportunity. You said no strings. This isn't a string, it's a door. You can walk through it or not. It's yours either way. She stepped closer. What if I fail? Then you try again, but at least the world will have seen what you're capable of. She stared at him, expression unreadable. You make it sound so easy. It's not, but you're not doing it alone. The submission deadline came fast. Della worked through every hour she could steal, early mornings, late nights, skipping meals because she forgot what time it was. She poured everything into 3 pieces, one about her childhood, one about the fear of being invisible, and one about hope. Raw, unpolished, and unapologetic. The night of the exhibition, Ian sent a black car to pick her up. Not his. A different one, subtle, understated because she'd told him once she didn't want the world to think she was being paraded. She stepped into the gallery wearing a tailored navy dress she'd borrowed from her friend's closet. Her hair was curled but not fancy. Her lipstick was red, not loud. She looked like herself. The gallery buzzed with clinking glasses and murmurs of curated praise, but when Della walked in, heads turned. Not because of what she wore, but because of what hung on the walls. Her name was printed on a white placard beneath the triptych that took up the largest space in the room. Della Foster. Unspoken things. She stood quietly beside the work, unsure how to receive the compliments whispered around her. People she'd never met talked about what they saw in the brushstrokes, the layering, the tension between color and silence. She wanted to cry and laugh and run all at once. Ian appeared beside her without warning, his hand brushing the small of her back. You did this, he said. She turned to look at him. You were right, it was never about the space or the car or the restaurant. It was about you, he finished. And what happens when someone finally refuses to look away? There were no cameras, no press, no one asking who she was dating or what she was wearing. Just her work and the man who'd become the only person who ever saw through all the layers. After the crowd began thinning, she pulled Ian into the corridor behind the gallery, where the air was cooler and quieter. My lease is up next month, she said, tone careful. He tilted his head. And I don't want to renew it, he waited. I don't want to live in a place that feels temporary anymore. His eyes searched hers. What are you saying? I want to stay with you, if you still want that. Ian's gaze went soft in a way that almost unraveled her. I've been waiting to ask, he said, but I didn't want to rush you. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. You didn't. You helped me find my rhythm. I think I was always playing offbeat before you. He kissed her, then slow, sure, and absolutely certain. A month later, she moved into his penthouse, not as a guest, not as someone who was just visiting between chapters, but as a partner, a painter, a woman who'd stopped running from the edges of her own story. And on a cool spring morning, as they stood hand in hand at the edge of the rooftop garden Ian had built just for her, she turned to him and said, You picked me up on the worst day of my life, he laughed. And it turned out to be mine. She raised an eyebrow. The best one, he clarified. She kissed him again, her hands curling into his shirt, and the city stretched out before them, full of light, full of noise, full of every kind of possibility. Because sometimes you miss your ride, only to find the one you were always meant to take. The last of the rain had dried from the rooftop tiles by the time Della stepped outside, a steaming mug of chamomile in her hands. The city was hushed beneath the violet hue of early evening, and the scent of new blossoms drifted up from the rooftop garden. She pushed her hair behind her ear and leaned against the railing, watching the lights flicker on in the buildings across the skyline. Behind her, the glass door slid open with a soft whoosh. You're hiding, Ian said, his voice low but amused. I'm thinking, she replied without turning. About how fast everything changed. He came to stand beside her, hands in the pockets of his tailored slacks. Scared? No, she said, not anymore, but there's something I need to ask. He turned his head slightly, waiting. Why did you never talk about your mother? She asked softly. There were things I didn't ask at the start because I didn't know if I had the right to, but now I think I do. Ian's jaw flexed. He didn't answer immediately, but when he did, his voice was quieter than usual. She left when I was 13, no note, no goodbye, just gone. Della's fingers curled around her mug. She was brilliant, he continued. A sculptor. The kind of person who could tear stone apart with her bare hands, then build something delicate out of it. She used to take me to her studio after school, let me work with clay. I think that's maybe why I was drawn to you at first. I didn't know, she murmured. No one really does. I stopped talking about her after the first year. My father buried her name with every cent he made, acted like she never existed. I think that's why I fought so hard to keep that old artist's loft. It reminded me of her. She reached over and took his hand. You've been holding that alone for too long. I didn't think anyone would really understand. I do, she said. I get what it's like to have a piece of yourself missing and still try to build something whole. He looked at her then, a long, steady look that made her chest tighten. I want us to have something that lasts, he said. Not just the studio or this place, something real. A life, she blinked, caught off guard by the shift in his tone. You sound like you've already decided, she said. I have. He pulled something from his pocket, a velvet box, simple and small. I've had this for weeks. Della stared at it, breath caught in her throat. I didn't want to give it to you at a gala or in a restaurant surrounded by strangers, Ian said. I wanted it to happen here, quiet, just us, the way we started. He opened the box. Inside was a ring unlike anything she'd imagined, no oversized stone, no flashy diamonds. Just a single opal set in rose gold, framed with 2 tiny sapphires on either side. It reminded me of your paintings, he said. The colors, the light that shifts depending on how you look at it. She couldn't speak. Her heart was pounding too hard. I want to build something with you, Della Foster, something that doesn't need polish or pretense, just truth, just us. Her eyes burned. You don't have to ask. I'm going to anyway, he said. Will you marry me? She nodded before the words even came out. Yes. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and she wrapped her arms around him, holding on like the world might shift again if she let go. They didn't go back inside for a long time. The stars came out and the air turned cool, but neither of them moved. They didn't need to. 3 months later, they stood in front of a handful of people at the old artist loft Ian had preserved. The space had been transformed for the occasion, draped lights across the beams, wildflowers in mismatched jars, and a long table set with hand-painted place cards. There was no press, no guest list curated by status. Just the people who mattered. Della wore a gown the color of winter clouds, barefooted, with a paintbrush tucked into the ribbon at her waist. Ian wore no tie, his sleeves rolled up, a streak of cobalt paint across the back of his hand from helping her finish a canvas that morning. I never thought I'd belong to someone, she said during her vows. But then you showed me I already did. I just hadn't met you yet. He responded with just 5 words, you're my beginning and end. They kissed beneath the skylight as the last of the sunlight spilled across the floorboards like a blessing. Later that night, Ian carried Della over the threshold of their new home, a converted brownstone on the Upper West Side. The walls were still half-painted, the furniture mismatched, and the living room smelled of turpentine and fresh wood, but it already felt like theirs. They danced barefoot in the kitchen to an old jazz record, wine glasses forgotten on the countertop, laughter echoing down the hall. I never thought I'd be this happy, she whispered. You haven't seen anything yet, he said, spinning her once, then catching her against his chest. As the record skipped and the city breathed beyond the windows, they stood wrapped in each other, the past finally quiet, the future wide open. And in the stillness between one breath and the next, they knew they'd found something rare, something worth keeping, something forever.